All right, thank you. Yeah, so we've been, we just got our second year data in for making relay cropping pay. Again, it was some interesting findings. We had some issues this year, and we'll discuss them in a minute. We had two main goals for our project. One was to see if we could make a relay cropping system actually have a higher profit margin than straight wheat alone, and to try and use that to then leverage more growers into growing wheat and thereby increasing the soil health benefits of growing that crop. So those are kind of two main goals from the system. So we mainly focus on the economics of the project and trying to make it pay. So 2019 season, these are pictures from my farm. We had a very good start in 2018. We planted early after white beans. They came up great. And in the spring, just like everyone else, we were wet. So we didn't get the wheat in, or the beans in quite as early as we were hoping to. We were probably, I think we're just at the end of May getting it in, so we were later than we wanted. You can tell the wheat there on your right. It was a little taller than I was hoping to get it in. We were hoping to actually get it in at the 4 to 6 inch height mark, so probably the beginning of May would have been optimum, but it just didn't work this year. So how we planted the wheat was we just blocked off every other row in the drill, or every 2 rows, we block 2 rows, leave 2 rows to get the twin row wheat. To plant our beans, we had a Kinsey. We actually used the front rows so that all the wheel traffic lined up with the blank skip rows, and it worked out quite well. Just a couple more pictures. So one of our issues is starting to show up in the picture on the right. This is actually the day of planting, and you can see over here on the wheat, there's a little bit of yellowing starting to happen on the leaves. At the time, I didn't notice it. That turned into a significant issue on our farm, and I can talk about that a little bit later. Here's some pictures from Peter Johnson's sites. So they all look like they got a little better timing of their bean planting, and the picture on the right was taken just to show a little bit of the weed pressure that comes with the relay cropping. It is a bit of a challenge to control the weeds. Both years I've had it on my farm, we've had grass issues. And Peter looks like he's got a little bit of lamb's quarters or something there. But yeah, the herbicide treatment was Buck Trail M before we plant the beans. And then you basically have to leave it until the beans come off, and then they're Roundup ready beans, so you spray them with beans to get rid of the grasses and any other weeds, and then usually you come back in pre-harvest and hit it with Roundup again just to get rid of any volunteer wheat. So to harvest our relay crops, and the big expense of our project was to buy these Flexi-Select shoes that just clip onto your Cutterbar. The idea behind them was to go down the bean rows with those skids, and they push the beans over, so you're not clipping them as you're cutting the wheat. You're trying to cut the wheat as low as possible to just give the beans as much sunlight as possible. They work okay. Found out this year with taller beans, what happens, they have got a nice point to them, and with the tall beans, they just kind of get pushed around the skid instead of underneath it, and we still got a significant amount of clipping, which I think significantly impacted our yield. Peter Johnson's site, I believe, is next. Yep. On his Cutterbar, he just installed 6-inch tile pipe over top of the Cutterbar, which would have cost a heck of a lot less money. And I think he said it works fairly well. He just loses a little bit of the wheat. If it's hanging over a little bit, it doesn't get pushed back into the row like with the Flexi-Selects. So he loses a little bit of wheat harvest at harvest, so that's a slight issue with that. Just a couple pictures from 2018. You can see from the combine picture a little bit of the grass growing up in between the rows. 2018, I also did a couple different row spacing trials, but we're not really going to talk about them today. A couple more pictures from Harvest. I believe the picture on the right is actually on the one trial I did with 15-inch wheat, 15-inch beans, and you can tell over here that this row got clipped a lot more than this row and this row. So these rows had skids on them, this row didn't. So you can tell the clipping difference anyways. So 2019 at Harvest, like I said, we had tall beans. The beans were basically up at the canopy level. So I was like, great, we're gonna have a great result, good bean yield, and we started harvesting them and realized that we were having clipping issues, and I didn't have time to modify or adjust anything, so I just kind of tried to minimize it as much as possible from inside the combine, and I probably still ended up with 50% clip, which was not very nice. A few pictures from Peter Johnson's site. You can see on his picture here the wheat that was left. They just kind of was leaning into the soybean rows. I think he mentions in his little report that he figures is probably 3% of the wheat that he didn't get harvested because of that. But he does do a nice job of leaving all the beans unclipped. So, and in the picture on the right, it just shows a little bit of, he had a check plot where it was just twin row wheat with no beans. So you can see the little bit of the weeds over here that were left. So that's another issue. But this is a picture from my farm at Harvest of the relays. We actually didn't get time to come in and do a pre-harvest burn down. So it was a lot of green material going through the combine. Most of what you can actually see most of what you can actually see here, that's still out, all the wheat stubble. So the beans are in these dark rows, and there's really not a whole lot of beans in there. You can see on the left-hand side, there's a couple rows that didn't get clipped too bad. So yeah, harvest was a bit of a challenge. There weren't many beans there. So we took it off and just, it was what it was. We had a weigh wagon at the end. So trying to make the data a little more presentable, I tried to make these graphs. Ian told me that he likes these this style graphs, so that's what I tried to do. Yeah. So the skinny lines represent all the data. The blue lines is kind of the meat of the data. And in the middle, which might be hard to see, there are bars in the middle, and I think that's your average. And in the bottom, just to sort of clarify, I put the numeric values, and I also highs and lows if you can read those little numbers. So this is actually 2 years of data all compiled together. Yeah, this is all yield results. So the bar on the left is your standard 7.5-inch wheat. Yielded anything from 108 bushels down to 44. The 44 was my farm this year. We had a disease in there that we couldn't control, and it just knocked the socks off our wheat. Like, it looked like it should have been 120 bushel wheat, and it was only 44. So next is so Peter Johnson, like I said, he had twin row wheat with no soybeans, so that was kind of, I just wanted to leave that in there just to show you there isn't really much yield effect from growing the soybeans in the wheat compared to no wheat, or no beans, sorry. And there is this data set's pretty small, so it's kind of not really significant. The soybean yields are down here. There's a few sites that we didn't get harvested. I didn't include those numbers in the averages. Like, we just kind of assumed that there was zero or minimal, so I just left them out of the data set. I'm not sure if that's what I should be doing, but that's what I did. So we've had anywhere from basically 5 bushels an acre up to 19. A lot of it is in the 5 to 10 range with Peter had a lot of results of 12 to 17, and we had one site do 19. An average of 13 bushels of soybeans in the relay system, and out of all the soybean check plots, our average was 60. So we just had a check plot for beans beside the plot just to make sure that we knew what the potential of the soybeans was if we hadn't grown the wheat at all. So here's just a graph of the crop revenue. So we just took our average yields and your market price at harvest, basically, for all the crops. And just on the data side, you've got these points. Those are my 2019 yields. They're just outliers of the normal data, so that's why they're down there. So yeah, this graph is just income only. The next graph here is net income. So to make the expenses simple, I just use the OMAFRA online tools to get a relative expense charts or numbers for calculating your expense for growing wheat, your expense for growing beans. I did adjust it for your planting populations and such, but that's pretty much all I did. So you can tell we aren't in a great position for making relay cropping pay here. We had 12 sites in total that had both wheat and beans harvested off them, and only 3 of those 12 sites actually showed a positive return over just straight wheat. And the returns are, I think, 30 to $94 an acre, with an average of $60 an acre loss compared to standard wheat. So not great numbers, but that's what they are, and we're hoping that in 2020 we can get some more data to either prove that these numbers are right, or that we can actually make some money and maybe figure something out, because I'm kind of at a loss right now to try and make the beans pop after harvest like they do down south. Like, that's the one issue that we've had, is once you take the wheat off, the beans just kind of stay stagnant there and they don't do a whole lot. So that's pretty much my results for now. Are there any questions?
Have you ran any results on your twin row wheat compared to conventional wheat? Are you only planting half your seed population when you plant your twin row wheat?
So it depends on the site. There is some data here. So this is your conventional wheat. This is just your twin row. But yeah, as far as that's just your yield numbers. But population-wise, yeah, the first year we did it was just kind of like whoever had a plot in is kind of who we accepted, and the simplest thing to do at that point was just tape your hole up and drive on. So yeah, you're just knocking down half your population. On my farm in 2019, we had about a 1.5 million seeds per acre on your 7.5 inch, and I tried to increase the rate and get it back up to about 1.2 in the twin row, but we just had a 1590 drill at that point, so it was just a complete guess. You take the crank and you crank it over and you're like, well, I'm up 25% from where I was, and I hope that I'm in the right range. We do have a grower who has an air cart, and I'm not sure if they calibrate it. I guess, yeah, if you have an air cart, you calibrate it for however many seeds, and then all of a sudden you block your rows. You're getting the same population on your twin row as you would your 7.5. So,
the reason I've asked this question, there's a man, I think he might be in your group, but he has planted wheat, twin row wheat or relay wheat 2 years in a row, and the relay wheat has equaled the fully planted wheat in bushels, or the yield was identical both years. first year was really drought related. It was corn or rain was a limiting factor. Last year he did not plant soybeans into it for rain reasons. But both years the wheat have yielded the same with less inputs on the twin row wheat. And
yeah, it's possible to get those results. So you're saying
to yourself, well, maybe we need to be reducing our inputs that way and make wheat pay more.
Yeah, you can reduce your inputs a little bit by going twin row for seeding rates, but yeah, the issue is your weed control. If you're not getting that complete canopy closure, you are going to get weeds, which is an issue. So.
Thanks very much, Mark.